I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Southwest Magazine. I'm joined today by Dr. Gary Irwin-Kenyon, Professor Emeritus of Gerontology at St. Thomas University, a Tai Chi instructor, as well as the author of Pathways to Stillness. Thank you so much for being here today, Gary.
Thanks, Vicki. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Well, and thank you for writing such an insightful book. It's really, I can't recommend it enough. It is a self-discovery journey of a book that every chapter really takes you on your own pathway to stillness. Can you tell people who haven't had the chance to read it, first of all, where they can order it?
Okay.
Because it's a tremendous, tremendous read, and I want to read it again more slowly and do all the exercises, and then also what inspired you to write it.
Okay. Should I start maybe by saying what gerontology
Please.
is, as you introduced me? And it's a newer field, so there are a lot of folks who still don't recognize the term. And it's basically about adult development and aging, so the process of aging. And the emeritus title is something that some of us are given after they think we've done a good job for any number of years or decades. That's kind of an honorary title. And since I started the program in gerontology at St. Thomas 40 years ago, they agreed to give me that designation. So that's basically what it's about. Yeah, Pathways to Stillness is it's available on Amazon. It's available in Indigo in Fredericton, St. John, and Montreal also. And it's published by Friesen Press. But those would be I should say also, because we're here in St. Andrews, it's available at McGuire's Cafe and Sunbury Shores. And then you were asking, why did I write the book? I've taught gerontology for 35 years or so. And I realized I always wanted to write a book like this. When you write academic books as a professor, they're more formal. There's kind of a formula and a way of expressing ideas, and you have to put a lot of references to other people's work. And that was great for what it was, but when I got further on, I always wanted to write a book that would just speak to other people. You know, people can read academic articles, but they aren't the same, they don't get the same way of saying something, is mostly. So I put together a whole bunch of notes, first of all, from things that I'd collected over the years. And I had a very good friend, Bill Randall. He and I have written a lot of books together too. And he said, well, I said, how do I go about this? And he said, just write. Just sit down and write. You don't have an order for chapters, you don't know anything else, you just write. And so he gave me a good motivation to do that. And so I just started writing about all the different ideas that are in the book. The other, I guess, technical part of it is I came across a book that was written by a Tai Chi, Taoist Tai Chi person, 18th or 19th century. And he wrote short chapters like this, and I thought, that's the format I want to use. I want to have short chapters, make some sort of a point to them, and then go on to another topic.
What's interesting is that it does walk you through stillness and living in the present moment, and at the same time, it makes you aware of your own life narrative. So it is kind of a balance between being connected to your whole life story and also learning to be present in every moment and to let go of what you can't control, and stepping away and learning to look at life in so many different ways. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's a good point. The idea about control. In our culture, we live in a culture of control. We think we can fix something or hire an expert or pay enough money and everything will go away. But for most of us, I think, at some point in our lives, we come up against something that doesn't work. No matter what we try to do, it just doesn't work. And that seems to be the entry point, and there are other people who write about this, like Eckhart Tolle, for example, a famous guy, that our stillness comes from suffering, that we come across something that we just can't do anything with, and if we can somehow learn to accept it or let it go, we may find some new good things happening in our lives.
That's one of the notes I have. Where does it say? Suffering is important. It's one of the notes I wrote to myself to talk to you about. And there's a interesting quote in the book about despair being suffering without meaning.
Yeah.
So when we really feel that despair, it's because we don't, suffering is important because it does teach us many lessons and places value in our life.
Yeah, that's as anyone who's been there knows, it's very uncomfortable when you are suffering something and there's no meaning, as you say. And Viktor Frankl was the one who wrote a lot about this too, and he was a survivor of Auschwitz death camps, and that's where he came up with this, and then became a neurologist and a psychologist, and in his career to help people for the rest of his lives because of what he'd been through. So there's no guarantee that we're going to suffer and find meaning.
Right.
But it's you know, some people would say, well, that's I wouldn't set up human life that way, you know, that I have to suffer, that something bad has to happen to me to get better. But that's the way it is. That's the way whoever designed us, that's how it was set up. So we have to do something with it. And the thing about the book is I'm almost contradicting myself. We can still do something, but it's not the same thing as doing in the sense of fixing,
right,
or having control. It's another kind. So you have those Eastern philosophies will talk about non-doing or being, which is different from doing, because it requires, it's kind of putting yourself in a position of letting go. And again, some people think, well, that's just being weak, you know, you're giving up, but it's not giving up. It's giving in to something. The wind's blowing too hard. I can't do this, and I can't do it alone.
And just learning to accept and face reality. Sometimes I think one point you make quite clear in the book is just how I think that we celebrate being busy a lot in our current society. Oh, this person's so busy, they do so much. But how that can actually backfire on a person, because when you're busy, you're not always facing those instances of suffering and those challenges head on. And I would imagine because of that, not evolving in a way that could be beneficial to your own life story.
Yeah, there's no balance there. I guess a lot of folks don't even recognize, as you're suggesting, they don't even recognize that there's another part of ourselves. One of my new colleagues at St. Thomas, Albert Banerjee, is doing quite a lot of work on the concept of mortality. And it addresses he's taking some things further, and we're going to do some collaborative stuff too. But it takes this idea that whatever we're doing should include some awareness that we aren't going to be here forever. So, but people who are totally involved that way don't want to recognize that, because they think it takes away from their motivation. You know, why would I bother doing anything? I know I'm going to die. So it's hard for some folks to embrace that other side of themselves, and that's why it takes tragedy very often to wake them up.
I wonder I love having these conversations because I think that these are the conversations that spin in your own head at night. Oh, am I going to die one day? What does it all mean? And it's so nice to have this conversation in the morning with another human. I wonder what led you to the field of gerontology. You were telling me that, and I think it's in your book as well, how many young people would sign up for this course, Death and Dying at St. Thomas University, which you'd think, if you saw that as a header for this is what the class is about, might scare people, but instead it's obviously something that even young people want to explore and think about.
Yeah, I mean, death and mortality are part of the aging process. In my case, I was curious about the meaning of life and the end of life issues from my early 20s.
Yeah.
When I was an undergraduate student, even younger actually, undergraduate student, I took a course on death and dying, and I thought, and then I took courses with existentialist philosophers, and their whole thing is about meaning or the lack thereof, depending on who you read. And those things, those two ideas both captured me right away. And I've been interested in that, so my whole life I've really been interested. And then when I started doing martial arts and Tai Chi, that also fit into those philosophies. So I've really been passionate and curious about all that since my 20s. Then when I started teaching, as you say, courses like death and dying, and some of my colleagues would say, why do you teach death and dying, and why do you teach it to young people? And with the first question, I said, well, it's there, isn't it? It's still there whether you like it or not. And I said, the younger students, and you're right to point out, the course would fill up right away. Whether it was 60 students, it would fill up and there'd be a waiting list. And the students had to write a learning paper at the end of the course, their personal experiences of the course, whatever they wanted to write. And there's so many stories of chronologically younger people who had friends who committed suicide, whose grandparents had dementia, they had their own illnesses, or they had major relationship breakups. Just so many rich stories. And many of these stories were not crying the blues. They had gone through kind of a hell, and they'd found new meaning in their lives. And they're finding that meaning at 20 or 25 years old. So that's part of the motivation. I thought, these ideas have really helped me, and the students have helped me too. And so I want to share this with a larger audience.
Mm-hmm. You can tell from reading the book how much the dialogue in the class made an impression on you. But what's nice about how you wrote it, and I wonder what motivated you to do this, is that most chapters end with you giving ideas to the reader of exercises they could do to follow this, almost like it's like you're in a class or it's like a self-help book. Why was that important to really involve the reader, not just as a passive reader, but as a really active reader in this book?
Well, I think the first part is I tried to write it in a certain way that would invite the reader to explore these ideas. And then there's another friend of mine actually in Fredericton, Rodrigo, and he suggested, this kind of a thing that you're writing, he's in media work, so he said, you might want to think about that take it another step further and invite people to explore their own stories. So I thought that was a great idea. And so I added on to many of the chapters where I invite the reader to say, okay, now I just talked about grief or stress or whatever the topic would be, or aging, whatever the topic would be. Now, if you sit back for a few minutes, what do you think of this? What does it mean for your life? Mm-hmm. And so that's why that was added on.
And sometimes I know that I was telling you when I got to the chapters on aging, I'm in my 40s now, and I'm feeling my vision go for the first time, and all these things that hit you as a human, and you might not say it out loud, but whether you're processing it consciously or unconsciously, realizing this is a sign of the decline, it's a lot to process. And then to still try to be on your journey and be present, it's a lot as a human, the journey we go through, the ups and downs, and finding meaning along the way can be hard sometimes when you're just faced with something as simple as that, when you're trying to read the small print of something and the magnitude of what's happening really hits you. It can be a lot. So taking a book like this and actually doing the exercises, I found was a really beneficial experience to all those little things that maybe, you know, hit me when I'm reading the back of a Tylenol.
Yeah. Right, the practical, well, you know, some folks say aging is not for sissies.
It's not.
And I mean, that's a good point that, you know, the longer we're on this planet, there are more changes, and some changes are wonderful, you know, relationships or money or health, we have good things that can happen. We don't have any trouble with that. But the other kinds of changes can really give us pretty severe challenges, and the longer we go on, you know, relationship changes and health changes and money changes, and if you have to move, for example, to a long-term care setting and you're out of your home, you're living with people you don't know, and so that's why long-term care settings need to be, you mentioned narrative before, they need to be narratively based on a person's life story. That's the other major theme in the book, is about looking at your own life story. But yes, it is challenging. So if we don't have anything else to go to help us with these more negative or losses that happen as we get older, it's got to be really, really tough if you have no sense of stillness, of whatever version of it. It doesn't need to be that you meditate, or it can be that, but there are many other pathways to stillness. If you find one or couple, it can take you a long way when you're dealing with these other changes.
One way you do that is as a Tai Chi, not just student, but instructor. I got to come with you to the Passamaquoddy Lodge this week to see you do a sitting Tai Chi lesson with a group of seniors who are living at the lodge, and it was a beautiful experience to see you. And is there a draw to Tai Chi because it's something you could take it with you your whole life? It's not something that you would age out of. In fact, you could get better at it in your later years.
Yes, that's a good point about Tai Chi. That some of this could be legend or not, but they suggest that your body gets weaker, but your chi, which is the energy in Tai Chi, can actually get stronger. And you can adapt it to pretty well anything. If you're alive, you can pretty well adapt it. Like the folks that I teach in nursing homes, it's seated first of all, as you say, and then they might have only one leg, or can only move one arm, or they can't do this or they can't do that. But there's something that they can do, or they can just, as I tell them in the class, you can just stay quiet, listen to the music, watch, or have a nap. And so when I approach it that way, I find people, most of them are not at all familiar with any of this. But when I approach it that way, they will give it a try. At Passamaquoddy Lodge, it's kind of fun because the Tai Chi class comes after bingo. So we're in the same big room, and we have quite a few people do the bingo class or game. And then the supervisor will say, okay, now just turn around, and Gary's here to do Tai Chi. And it works quite well, because a lot of them will stay. And you know, when I first started, there's I don't know, but you know, Harriet there, she's sticking around, so I think I'll stick around for. And then it starts to grow, and they find it pleasant in whatever form. And I also talk about the fact that most of us are told what to do by our parents, by our boss. In school, we always have to measure up to something. And I say, you don't have to measure up to anything here. And you can just see the stress levels drop in people. So they're a wonderful group to teach. They're so engaged.
I know that for our viewers at home, we are going to you're going to walk us through 5 minutes of seated Tai Chi to end this episode. But again, the door is open to come back anytime that you'd like. But I'm excited to do it. I know that I was the type of person when I was younger that the idea of doing a meditation class terrified me. But I'm getting better. I'm getting better with age. I used to find being alone with my thoughts my mind would just race. So it's learning to slow your mind down in the process that honestly could be an ongoing, I don't want to say struggle, but it's a process for me to get to the point that I know that I aspire to be similar to you, but I'm still not there.
Well, it's we're all made differently too. Like my wife Liz, who by the way teaches a stand-up version of Tai Chi here in St. Andrews, and you can find out about that through me if you like, by my email or by my website. And she does a stand-up version of Tai Chi, but for her, sitting down and watching your breath doesn't work most of the time. She's got to be walking the beach or painting because she's an artist. That brings her stillness. So one of my teachers, I remember, he said, some people have to do something as they go towards being still. So, you know, they can't sit and meditate, but but with gradually the intention, you can hopefully get closer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I said to someone once, I said, having a dog made me more present because I have to walk her, and she's very present. So kind of following her lead sometimes might sound silly, but she's definitely helped. But I'd love to, if you can, how do we sit to start a 5-minute Tai Chi session off?
Okay. Well,
I'll try this.
It depends, you know, in the audience, if you're in a wheelchair, you know, it depends on those things, but you just do what you can. And we'll do a couple of movements. One is called the wave. A lot of Tai Chi movements are based on animals and nature. And so you start with your palms turned out, and in Tai Chi you try not to lock your joints, so you never have your arms totally locked. And you're trying to do as little as possible. Whoever designed this was amazing at efficiency of energy. So for example, when we do this move, you don't lift your shoulders, you lift your arms, but you try to keep your shoulders relaxed. Yeah. And you come up to about shoulder height, turn over, and float back down. Yeah, that's it. Now there's breathing in all these movements, which with practice, you gradually do the two at once. But so you breathe in when you come up, so you don't worry too much about it at first, and then float back down as you breathe out. So you're very gently trying to coordinate your breathing with the movement. Breathing in as you come up, turn over, float back down. Okay, what about two more? So again, a nice breath, turn over, breathe out as you float back down, just like you're in water. Okay, and then again, turn over, float back down. Yeah. That's it. So we'll do another one in a second, but the way this works is you're trying to be aware of your breathing, which is in itself very, very important. You know, most yoga teachers would say if you can't do any movements, just breathe. Tai Chi teachers too. But also, so you're gently coordinating, breathing and coordinating the movement, so you're paying attention, trying to pay attention. And so what Tai Chi people would say is, they talk about the monkey mind. That our mind is always going from one thing to the next. And, or hamster mind is one of my students calls it. So what this does is it slows down the monkey mind. Now when you first start training, it might only slow it down for a few seconds, but that's enough to give you the stillness practice, that it kind of breaks through, that you're practicing some stillness, even if it comes back right away. And then gradually, as you keep practicing, that space between your thoughts and you gets bigger. So you get you're, and I'm by no means perfect at this, I don't know if anybody is, but you get so you can watch your thoughts like a movie. So it doesn't really stop you from feeling some relaxation and doing the movements, even though you got some noise going on in the background. So let's try another one, which is with your palms out here. We call this the finger curl. So you start with your little fingers, curl them, curl the wrists, and then turn it over and push back out with the palms of your hands. Yeah, that's good. Just keep a little bend in your elbows. And then you just do a graceful move here back to the top. That's it. And then breathing, fingers, wrists, elbows, push. Yeah, and then back to the top. Now again, this takes repetition, and you'll get, it's not that difficult, but it takes repetition. So the breathing here is when you're breathing in like this, fold, and push back out as you breathe out. And then back to the top. Yeah. Okay, fingers, wrists, elbows, push back out. Maybe we'll do one more. Back to the top. Fingers, wrists, elbow, and push back out.
Makes me very aware that when I'm learning something new or thinking about something or in a new situation, I hold my breath a lot.
Yeah.
And it's a funny thing to realize that you're not even breathing when you're feeling, I don't know if it's, I wouldn't say it's anxiety, but it's a new situation. So it turns out I hold my breath when I'm trying to figure things out, which can't be very healthy.
But when you're first learning something, it's not so easy to relax. But with these movements, if you're just doing, if you just find, even if you find 2 minutes, if you find 2 minutes, go somewhere. I would say if you learn one move that you can remember, it's just this wave.
Okay.
Just by coming up, breathing in, shoulder height, turn over, float back down. So the trick is, and some people don't want to hear that, but it's like anything else. You just try to go to a quiet place somewhere for a couple of minutes and do a bit of breathing.
Gary, it's been such a fascinating conversation with you today. I'd like to extend the invitation to come back anytime. There might be a show in the works for those at home. But thank you so much for not just the walkthrough today, but for sharing about your book. And I hope that more people at home pick up Pathways to Stillness, because it truly is such a compelling read and one I will read again.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
My guest today has been Dr. Gary Irwin-Kenyon, talking about his book, Pathways to Stillness, and leading us through Tai Chi. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Southwest Magazine.
Southwest Magazine is a news and public affairs production of CHCO Television.